It's a real struggle. This is my best friend Hunter. Hunter and I both only have older sisters, and so we consider each other's brother. And we were raised in the same church together. We grew up at Vermont Street Church of Christ. Our families had us hang out together a lot. And naturally, as young boys hang out together, we would get hurt a lot. And this one time, Hunter and I, we were out on the mesa of Albuquerque, which is just the desert and some sand dunes. And we thought it was a really good idea if we would dig this big cave in the side of very structurally sound. And so we're digging away. I'm like 13 years old at this time. And naturally, the cave collapses. I don't remember it collapsing. I remember waking up at the bottom of the dune to Hunter screaming my name. And so I get up as fast as I can and I run up that hill to where he is. And he's buried up to his armpits in sand. And I'm digging him out and he's screaming. And we finally get the sand down to about his hips. And he's able to get one leg out, and we're digging the other leg out. And we finally get it out, and he can't walk. Just everything that happened in that moment, he can barely stand up. He can only take a couple of steps. And he's saying, "Go get my mom, go get my mom." So I ran down the sand dune, ran into the neighborhood house, and I bust in the front door, and I'm crying, Paula, Hunter's hurt." And we get the Suburban, and we drive it as far as we can into the sand dunes. And we get Hunter into the Suburban and drive him back home. And shortly after, my parents came to pick me up. That was one of just a few times that Hunter and I got hurt. Seriously, like that. I mean, but when we talk about that situation and all the other ones now, it was one of the things that brought us close together. Those memories that we had of the number of times we put each other's lives in danger and at the same time we saved each other's lives, that's how much we bonded. We can think back to that and never want to have that experience again, but we're thankful to what happened to that because it's grown our brotherhood together. As time went on, Hunter and I both had a friend, and unfortunately, this guy ended up taking his own life. And I wasn't able to attend the funeral, and Hunter was. But he called me after the funeral and he said, "If you ever get into a situation where whatever you need is anything, you let me know. Don't ever let this be your fate. If it's money, if it's emotions, whatever you need, please come to me." And I said the exact same thing to him because neither of us wanted the other one to suffer that sort of a fate and that sort of a crisis. And crisis naturally brings people together. Crisis is a unifier. You've been through a crisis. I know you have. Or you've seen somebody else go through one and you wanted to be there for them and do everything that you could for them, as little as that could have been. You wanted to do something. And sometimes it looked really grim, either for you or for that other person. You know what it's like to feel that bond and something like that. In the book of Exodus, Israel is at the edge of the Red Sea. And the Egyptian army is coming to pursue them, to slaughter them, absolutely decimate them. And their view probably would have looked a lot something like this picture in the background. All you can see is the water and maybe the land that's on the other side, but it does not look like you're going to get to that. I don't think all the goats and all the old people and all the children were going to swim that far to save themselves at the edge of the sea as Egypt is coming to completely destroy Israel for leaving in the Exodus. But that passage that you see there, Exodus 14:14, says everything about this crisis, everything about that situation, because Exodus 14:14 says, and remember this for the rest of your life, the Lord will fight for you. You need nothing but to hold your peace. And God, of course, comes through. On one side, he parts the sea for an entire nation to cross this vast sea on dry ground to salvation. And on the other side, he uses the whirlwind to hold off the Egyptian army as an entire nation of people was crossing the sea. It looked hopeless. But God was there to fight and give them the victory. And all they needed was that God that also brought them out of Egypt. And another significant water crossing is found in the book of Joshua, Joshua chapter 3. And in Joshua chapter 3, they're getting ready to cross the Jordan River. The children of Israel are, by Joshua's instruction, because now Moses has passed on the baton of leadership with God to Joshua. And at this time, Joshua says, get ready, because we're going to cross the Jordan. You get no pushback like the terror that they felt crossing the Red Sea. They had seen this before. They heard about this. This was something that they were familiar with God being able to do, to part the water. And that's exactly what God does when they come to this situation. In Joshua chapter 3 and verse 16, it says, well, let's back up to verse 15 because it's important. Joshua chapter 3, verse 15 says, and as those who bore the ark came to the Jordan, and the feet of the priests who bore the ark dipped in the edge of the water, for the Jordan overflows all its banks during the whole time of the harvest. This is not a shallow time. This is not a minor crossing. The bank is overflowing in the harvest, as it always does. Verse 16, and the waters which came down upstream stood still and rose in a heap very far away at the city of Adam and the city beside Zareth. So the waters that went down into the sea of Arabah, the salt sea, failed and were cut off, and the people crossed over opposite Jericho. Then the priests who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood on dry ground. It wasn't even muddy, it was dry ground. And they stood in the midst of the Jordan, and Israel crossed over on dry ground, and until the people had crossed completely over the Jordan. Another great water crossing on dry ground. And this is what Joshua does. Joshua does something really important by the instruction of God. God tells Joshua, have 12 people take stones, and this is going to serve as a memorial. Verse 5 of chapter 4 says, Joshua told them, cross over before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, each one of you take up a stone on his shoulder according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel, that this may be a sign among you when your children ask in time to come, saying, what do these stones mean? Verse 9, we're going to jump down a little bit, says, then Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan and the place where the feet of the priests who bore the ark of the covenant stood, and they are there to this day. Why would they be there? Well, let's look at verse 21 of chapter 4. Then he spoke to the children of Israel, saying, when your children ask their fathers in the time to come, saying, what are these stones? Then you shall let your children know, saying, Israel crossed over this Jordan on dry land, for the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before you, until you had crossed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up before us until we had crossed over, that all the people of the earth may know the hand of the Lord, that it is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever. This was a memorial that Joshua set up to say, look what God did before, and look what he's done for us this time. Something absolutely miraculous. Something completely abnormal. Look what God has done. And this is not the only establishment of a stone memorial that we see in 1 Samuel 7. We have the victory of the Philistines. And in 1 Samuel 7, I'm going to start in verse 10. It says, now as Samuel was offering up the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to battle against Israel. But the Lord thundered with a loud thunder upon the Philistines that day, and so confused them that they were overcome before Israel. And the men of Israel went out of Mizpah and pursued the Philistines and drove them back as below Bethkar. Then Samuel took a stone and set it between Mizpah and Shin, and called his name Ebenezer, saying, thus far the Lord has helped us. Both Joshua and Samuel set up a stone to say, remember what God has done for us this far. God has led us to victory this far. And it was important for them to establish these memorials, and God had them to establish these memorials, not only as a sign, but something to pass on to the next generation so that they would remember what God had done in the past, because Israel was also often prone to forgetting what the Lord had done for them, like we see in the book of Numbers. In Numbers chapter 13, you're probably familiar with the story. Spies are sent out into the land that God is going to give to the children of Israel. And the group of spies come back, Caleb and Joshua among them. And when they bring back, the stuff they bring back is wonderful. They bring back a whole cluster of grapes that's so big, they have to put it on a post and carry it on the shoulders between two people. And they come back with this report that says, the land is flowing with milk and honey. It is exceedingly good. It's not okay land. It's not great land. It's exceedingly good, the land that God is going to give us. But there's a problem. Chapter 13 and verse 29 of Numbers. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south. The Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites, they dwell by the sea along the banks of the Jordan. We got a problem, and I don't think we can overcome this. Our enemies are there. But Caleb says, no. Caleb's got the right idea. Caleb says in verse 30, let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it. Caleb remembers, well, I know what happened at the Red Sea. I know how God has given us a victory in the past. Let's go right now to take up the land that God has already promised for us. And he gets a lot of pushback. Verse 31, but the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they gave the children of Israel a bad report about the land. It devours. The people there are of great stature. In fact, we see ourselves as grasshoppers, and they see us as grasshoppers, nothing more than just some insects. There's no hope for us to fulfill this mission before we even start it, even though we've already gone to see that it's a wonderful land. Milk, honey, grapes. We're not gonna go. It's too much for us. There's no way we can get through the crisis that's about to come in taking this land and following the instruction of God. And Israel believes it. It says in chapter 14 that the whole congregation the whole people wept all night and complained against Moses and Aaron. And they said, if only we had died where we had in Egypt, if only we never made it through the wilderness, if only we had never overcome the previous crisis that we came through to get to this point, we wouldn't have to go through another one and take hold of the promise that God has given us. If only we could just go back to that. Let's go back to Egypt. Let's go back to live as slaves. Let's go back to serving a polytheistic nation. Let's go back to being oppressed because we're scared of what's about to come. The report that's been delivered to us is a fearful report, and I don't think that we can get through it. And once again, Caleb stands up with Joshua. Numbers 14, verse 6. But Joshua, the son of Nun, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who spied out the land, tore their clothes. They were there. They saw the land. They know the good report. They spoke to all the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, the land we passed through to spy out is exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, which I think he's proved he already has, in staying with you through the wilderness and redeeming you from Egypt. If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into the land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. Joshua and Caleb unite together and unite with the Lord. Yes, there are enemies in this land that we're about to inherit, but God has taken their protection from them. God is with us. We are the ones that's going to get through this. We're seeing the salvation that's on the other side, and you can only see the crisis before you. When they hear this, Israel decides to persecute the news of salvation. And all the congregation said to stone them with stones. They didn't want the good news. They didn't want to get through the next crisis. All they knew is that they were scared and they would rather live in the one before them or have died in the one before them. You have two groups here. People naturally join together, unite in crisis, but you have two groups here. You have the people that are scared, the people that are led by the chaos, the people that know that this is a bad land because of the news that was delivered to them from the people that had been there and known it was a good land and it was a place that God had provided for them. And then you have the small group, Joshua and Caleb, Moses and Aaron. This is an exceedingly good land, and God will take us through this step to get us to the next one and into victory and into salvation. You have two groups here. If any time was the time to remember what God had done back in the Red Sea, now was that time. Now was that time, Israel, to unite together and to unite with God. He's brought you this far, and you haven't even started the next trial yet, the next campaign yet, and you're already ready to quit. And it wasn't going to be their last one either. God had already told them, I'm going to give you this land. You will take the exceedingly good land. You're aware of what an Ebenezer is already. The memorial stone. God has brought us this far. He has taken us through the last crisis and got us to this point right here. And what do you think we expect of the next one that's going to come our way? Because it will come. And we're not unfamiliar to crisis and memorials. We have our own. We have memorials that say we experienced a dark time. But we're still here. And this is the starting line for something new. We've had a crisis, but we overcame. Joshua and Samuel knew that. God gave Joshua and Samuel memorials so that the children of Israel would remember forever. I you the last crisis, and I've given you instruction. And if you hold to me, I'll take you through the next one too. He gives victory in every single challenge. The church, we serve that same God that brought Israel through the Red Sea. We serve that same God that stopped the waters of the Jordan. That is the God that we serve. That's the God that we unite with. That is the God that has always brought us victory. In the passage that was read tonight in Ephesians chapter 4, there's a lot of unifying instructions that Paul gives to the church of Ephesians. He says, bear with one another. In love, bear. It takes a work. And in the same way, endeavor to keep the unity of the Spirit. Endeavor, it's a work to stay united with this Spirit. It takes a work. But he also says, but there's only one. There's one body, one Spirit, just as you were called in one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is above all and through all and in you all. That same God that brought Israel through the Red Sea is also the same God that unites the church today. I'd say in crisis, the church, we've got it worked out pretty well when we know one of our members is hurting. We know that when somebody goes to the hospital, we want to be there and support that. When somebody's going through hard times, we do what we can to help that person and overcome that. That's a general expectation that we have. And I would say Santa Clara's probably got it down pat, even though I've only been here for like a month. It seems like you guys are doing great with that. Don't let off the gas. But that has to follow through in every other crisis. We received good news today. The Supreme Court is going to let California let us worship. We've come through one more thing. The church united had to fight for that. The church has to stand together in crisis just like that one and the rest of the crisis that will come our way that will want to pull us away from our faith. Or whatever influence comes upon us when they make fun of doctrine, the fun of the way we live, fun of what we believe in. We build each other up because we're united with one God and one Spirit. It won't be our only crisis that we experience. We'll experience another one, and another one after, and another one after that. But we also remember after every single trial that we come through, God has brought us this far. And he always has. And that's why we're still here. And he'll take us through the next one into victory, whether that's on this earth or whether that's to be in glory with him. Crisis will naturally bring us closer together. And Israel experienced that, and sometimes they forgot it. Let's not be like that, but let's be like when they establish a memorial in Ebenezer and say, God will take us through every single crisis. Unite together as the church and unite with God, just as Joshua and Caleb did. You might be experiencing a crisis still in your own life. Hard times, whatever it is. Well, since we're united as a family, we're available to pray for each other with that. We're here to help each other through that. And God will help us through that too. Or if you want to be united with Christ, if you want to pass through the waters and into salvation, Christ wants you to be united with him also. If you need to be baptized, or if you need our help, let it be known. We're going to sing a song.